So, part 2 of our discussion, we start with the stages or aspects of taxation. First one is the Legislative Act, which is the levy or imposition. In here, okay, ito ang pinaka-first. So, hindi ito pwedeng pag-jumble-jumblein kasi nga this is the first step, okay? This is the process in which involves the passage of tax laws or ordinances through the legislature. So, the tax laws to be passed shall determine those who will be taxed or the subjects of taxation, how much is to be collected, which is the tax base and the tax rate, okay? And lastly, how taxes are to be implemented. Kindly read the discretions or the scope of legislative power to tax. Kasi the legislative has the discretion as to the purpose. Mga na-discuss ko naman na yan kanina. Okay? Pero of course, it is subject to constitutional and contractual and inherent limitations. Now, the second stage after the legislative department, okay, meron na silang ginawang law. May naipasa na silang batas na tax law. Ang after nun, ang mangyayari na is the Executive Act, which is the assessment and collection. Anong nangyari sa assessment and collection? In here, this is the process where the tax laws are implemented, okay, through its administrative agencies such as yung Bureau of Internal Revenue or the Bureau of Customs. So, example, yung BIR, okay, may i-assess silang property sa Tuguegarao City. That is the Executive Act. Always remember, the Executive Act must be exercised with a legal basis, meaning dapat merong tax law. Okay? Hindi pwedeng mag-exercise, hindi sila pwedeng assess na lang, hindi sila pwedeng collect na wala namang tax laws because that will be a violation of our constitutional rights. Number 3 is the Taxpayers Act. This will complete the stages or the process. That is the act of paying the taxes or the payment. Again, payment may be generally in the form of money. Pwede bang certificates? Yes. Diba nasabi ko na rin yan kanina. There's this also called a step which is the Taxpayers and Executive Act. That is the refund. This will be discussed more later on, but I will just give you a brief discussion. In here, a claim for refund, parang refund, pag may nasobrahan ka sa babayaran, babalik sa'yo. Ganun yon. Kung may sobra sa nabayaran mong tax, pwedeng ibalik sa'yo through a refund. Here, a claim for refund must be filed with the Commissioner of Internal Revenue. A suit or proceeding may be filed within 2 years from the date of payment of the tax or penalty, regardless of any supervening costs that may arise after payment. So, as provided in your NIRC or the National Internal Revenue Code, okay, the commissioner may, even without a written claim, may refund or credit any tax where on the face of the return, such payment appears clearly to have been erroneously paid. So, ang commissioner ng Bureau of Internal Revenue, pwede po silang automatic na mag-declare ng refund on your or claims on your part. Kung sa return mismo, kasi meron tayong tinatawag na income tax return. Okay? Kung makikita naman doon sa mismong return, so nasobrahan yung bayaran mo, of course, there's no need for a written claim kasi nga, on the face of the return, there's already it appears to have been erroneously paid. What are the requisites of a valid tax? There are 5. Again, it must be for public purpose, it must be uniform, the person or property tax is within the jurisdiction of the taxing authority, Number 4, assessment and collection is in consonance with due process clause. And lastly, the tax must not infringe on the inherent and constitutional limitations of power of taxation. There are many kinds of taxes. Okay, it can be as to object, it can be as to burden or incidence, it can also be as to tax rates, pwede rin as to purpose, as to scope, okay, and as to graduation. Actually, there are very dami-daming kinds of taxes. Isa-isahin natin. As to object, okay, it can be a personal, poll or capitation tax. It can be a property tax or it can be a privilege or excise tax. Okay? Ano tong personal, poll or capitation tax na sinasabi? In personal, poll or capitation tax, yung tax na nai-impose doon sa tao, okay, na nagre-reside within a specific territory. Example, si Pedro, taga Tugigaraw City siya, okay? Example, si Pedro, okay? Regardless of Pinoy man siya or Chinese man siya, okay? As long as he is residing in Tuguegarao City, okay? Regardless of whether or not he is a doctor, a businessman, or he is not employed, may trabaho man siya o wala, Pilipino man siya o hindi, as long as residente siya ng Tuguegarao, then a tax will be imposed upon him. And what tax is that? That is a community development tax or the so-called cedula. Okay? Ano naman ang property tax? Okay? An example of which is the annual real property tax. Okay? This is a tax imposed on property. It can be a real or personal property. Okay? Kung sa personal, poll or capitation tax, tao ang natataksan, sa property tax naman is property ang natataksan. And property under the civil law, there are two kinds. The movable or the personal property or immovable or real property. Ano tong mga movable or personal property? Okay, can be mga sasakyan, mga laptop, cellphone, anything that can be moved from one place to another, okay, without destroying the essence of that property. While a real or immovable property are those that example, mga lupa, mga bahay, ganyan. Those that are enumerated under the civil law. Okay? So, next is the privilege or excise tax. Ano naman ito? Example is yung professional tax. Okay? It is said that an excise tax is a charge imposed upon, number 1, it can be through a performance of an act, it can be enjoyment of a privilege, or the engagement in an occupation, profession, or business. So, an example of privilege or excise tax is your professional tax. Always remember po na ang obligation to pay excise tax is based on the voluntary action of the person taxed in performing the act or engaging in the activity which is the subject to the excise. The term excise tax is synonymous with the privilege tax, okay? And the two are often used interchangeably. Next, we go to as to burden or incidence. It can be a direct tax or indirect tax. Example of when we say incidence, okay? As to incidence or as to burden, ang tanong dyan is, who pays the burden of taxation? So, ang sagot can be direct or indirect. When we say direct, it is imposed on the person obliged to pay the same, and this burden cannot be shifted or passed on another. Kasi nga po, hindi po siya pwedeng ma-shift, hindi mo siya pwedeng i-transfer, hindi mo pwedeng ipasa, kasi nga direct ito sa'yo. Okay? Example is yung income tax. So, remember here, the liability for the payment of the tax is the incidence and the burden is the impact. Okay? Next one is indirect tax. Ano naman ang indirect tax? Ang indirect tax are the payment in indirect tax, the payment is demanded from a person who is allowed to transfer the burden of taxation to another. Okay? Example is your value-added tax. So, when you go to McDonald's and you pay for your food, okay, makikita mo dun sa resibo yung value-added tax. Ganyan. So, nasi-shift yung burden from the McDonald's to the buyer. Another example is your percentage tax, some excise tax on specific or specified goods and custom duties. Next, as to tax rate. As to tax rate naman tayo, okay? We have this so-called as to tax rate or as to the amount, okay? We have this so-called specific tax and ad valorem tax or the mix, okay? As to specific tax, this is a fixed amount based on the volume, weights, or quantity of goods as measured by tools, instrument, or standards. Kasi nga fixed po to, specific to. It requires no assessment as the subject of taxation is often listed according to their general classification. Example nito are tax on mga gasolina, LPG, mga petroleum, gasol, mga ganyan, mga products, mga wires, mga sigarilyo, mga liquors, mga beer, mga ganyan. Paano naman yung ad valorem? Okay? Kung ang specific tax is based on the volume, sa weight, sa quantity, ang ad valorem naman, okay, is based on the value of the property subject to tax, from the word valorem, okay, value. So, here, the assessment is necessary to determine the amount payable, okay? Example of ad valorem tax is the tax on real estate tax, excise tax on automobiles, mga sasakyan, ganyan, and properties. Mga pabango, mga ganyan, jewelry, perfumes, because these, meron silang value dun. These properties have value. Diba? Next is we have the so-called fixed. May combination ng ad valorem and specific. Next is the as to purpose naman tayo. Okay? We have the so-called general or fiscal tax and the special or the so-called regulatory or sumptuary tax. Ano naman po ito? Okay? Ang general or fiscal tax, it is levied for the general or ordinary purpose of the government. Example nito is mga income tax, value-added tax, and of course, almost all other taxes. Para naman yung special, okay? This is to achieve a special purpose. Kung ang general is general purpose o yung ordinary purpose, ang special or sumptuary tax yung mga special, yung purpose. Example, okay? Example, yung mga protective tariffs or customs duties on imported goods to enable similar products manufactured locally to compete with such imports in the domestic market. Next, we have this so-called as to scope or authority. Okay? We have the national and the municipal or the local. Alam niyo na yan. The national, which is the Congress or the Legislative Department. Pwede rin yung BIR, yung Bureau of Customs, ganyan. Yung municipal or local naman is obviously the sanggunians of the different local government units, yung barangay, municipal, or the city, ganyan. As to graduation naman, okay? Yung graduation, okay, there are four. Can be progressive, okay? It can be regressive, can be proportionate, or it can be disgressive. Ano naman po ito? Okay? When we say progressive, okay? Progressive or graduated tax, okay? As the tax base grows, the tax rate increases. Example, okay? Individual income tax. So, sa progressive or graduated tax, from the word progressive, pataas, okay? Pag as the tax base grows, the tax rate increases, okay? Yung regressive naman, okay, kabaliktaran lang. As tax rate increases, the tax rate increases as the tax base decreases. So, always remember that there is no regressive tax in the Philippines. Okay? Ang regressive tax, wala to sa Pilipinas. We also have the so-called proportionate or the flat rate. In here, the rate of tax is unitary or single rate. Example, yung 12% na VAT. Okay? Yung disgressive naman, it is the increase in tax rate is not proportionate to the increase of tax base. Here, a fixed rate is imposed on a certain amount and it diminishes gradually on sums below it. So, the tax rate in this case is arbitrary. So, because the increase in tax rate is not proportionate to the increase of tax rate. Next, we have the different general concepts in taxation. First, we have the so-called prospectivity of tax laws. Ano itong tinatawag natin na prospectivity? The other term for prospective is something that has the potential, future, okay? It can be possible, anticipated, okay? Prospectivity of tax laws, okay? So, the general rule as provided under the law is that tax laws are prospective in operation. Ibig sabihin, pa-forward ang application ng mga tax laws. Hindi pwedeng bumalik. Kung matandaan nyo yung issues nila Jamil, di ba? Okay? Question daw yan kung yung mga vloggers, covered daw ba sila dun sa income tax? Okay, syempre, of course, ang nakalagay kasi sa batas, okay, income. So, from the word income, walang sinabi kung from legal or illegal ba yan. Hindi yan classify as long as income yan. It's taxable. Okay? So, here, bakit daw prospective in operation? Okay? Here, the nature and the amount of the tax under the tax laws enacted after the transaction could not have been foreseen or understood by the taxpayer at the time of the transaction. Of course, there is an exemption when the legislative intent expressly so declare that it can be applied retroactively. Imprescriptibility of taxes. Ano to? Anong ibig sabihin ng imprescriptibility? Ang imprescriptibility, okay, imprescriptible or something na it cannot be taken away by prescription or lapse of time. Hindi mag-expire. Ganon. It hindi siya mag-expire. Ang taxes, hindi po siya mag-expire. Okay? Unless otherwise provided by law. Merong prescriptions found in NIRC. We will discuss that later on na lang. Merong 3 years, merong 10 years, merong 5 years. Okay? Remember that the situs of taxation, anong situs? Yung place of taxation. Okay? So, the state where the subject to be taxed has a situs may rightfully levy and collect tax. The situs is necessary in the state which has jurisdiction or which exercises dominion over the subject in question. So, what are the factors that determine situs? There are many. It can be the nature of the tax, the subject matter of the tax, possible protection and benefit that may accrue both on the government and the taxpayer, the citizenship, the residency, and the source of income. And we have the so-called double taxation. Ano tong double taxation? Double taxation means taxing the same property twice when it should have been taxed only once. That is taxing the same person twice by the same jurisdiction for the same thing. We will have a discussion later on.